Wagwan internet people, it's Multiplier, and today, as in right now, right here, right now, I'm going to tell you how to remix in Ableton Live. So, let's keep things simple, let's start at the basics. So, I downloaded some remix parts from Beatport's website, just to kind of demonstrate this with. So, we'll unzip them first of all. Cool, delete the zip, and in this little folder we have some sort of Ableton project, but we'll ignore that. Normally you just get a set of what's called stems or parts or bits. So in this case we have Hardwell, something or other, and we've got these kind of WAV files. So let's close that down and I'll show you the first technique. So the first technique is to warp some existing stems to the tempo that you want your remix to be. So let's do that. So let's go into downloads, lowdowns. Right, so we've got a folder here and we've got a few things. We've got acid percussion, break synths, build synths, and so on. So let's listen to a bit of it to see what's going on. If it helps if I turn my headphones up. Right, cool. So it looks like they're basically fully bounced sections. So if you have a look, say, given any given section, see how there's a load of gap and then there's the bit we want and then a load of gap. That basically means when Hardwell or whoever else made this track actually exported the stems, he just exported the entire track without chopping it down into the useful bits. So we need to warp each bit. So how do we do that? The first step to warp, or the easy way to warp, is to find the BPM of the track. So to do that, we need something where we can easily find the BPM. So this acid percussion, because it's repetitive, should be good for that. So we'll drag out that as an audio clip, and then we will hit the warp button, see what happens. It probably won't work. Cool. So let's do, so we're going to drag a warp marker to the start of the first thing. So probably see how there's like a tiny little arrow, dude? We'll hover our mouse over it until it goes like that. Hold shift, click and drag, and then double click. And that sets our warp marker just where we want. So we'll double click to get rid of, we double click to get rid of the first one. And then we'll drag the first warp marker to the start of the first bar. So what we need to do now is we want to make sure there's only one warp marker there. And because we know the track will be a consistent BPM the whole way through, all we need to do is figure out the right BPM. And then once we click this first warp marker, something like click, then under this segment BPM, we enter the BPM we want, and then it will run the whole clip at the right BPM. And then there's no more warp markers needed. It's nice and clean. So there's also the question of, that might not be the best place to start the clip. We'll figure that out in a sec. So we need to find the BPM. Let's just guess a BPM, maybe 128. Let's see what that looks like. See how, because it's like a repetitive pattern, we can pretty much just look at the grid and see if that's the right BPM. And looking at it, it looks like it is the right BPM. So we know the BPM is 128. Now what we will do is delete that, remember 128, and then we'll drag it back out again. Now when we click warp, and now from the start of the first warp marker, which is at the start of the clip, which is actually what we want, we'll click and then we'll type in 128. And now everything is perfectly warped to the exact tempo. So you see now everything kind of looks right. You've got the first section here. It's always worth having a visual look just to make sure it looks right as well. So we've got the first section of 16 bars, another 8 bars. It finishes just where we want. So that's always a good sign that we've done the warping correctly. So that's basically how you do it. Let's show you with another clip. So let's look at these drop synth maybe. So we'll drag out drop synth as a clip. In fact, let's drag it out somewhere more useful, like in arrangement view. So press shift to jump between session and arrangement view. Learn your shortcuts, it saves bear time. So, and I like bears. Right, so we need to click this little orange guy because you see how it's kind of like grayed out right now. So it's currently playing that track in session mode. So we'll click that and now we're back to arrangement. So we click the clip, we need to press the warp button, and then we've only got one warp marker at the start, the very, very start of the clip. So we click the first warp marker, click segment BPM, type in 128, enter key, and now everything is perfectly warped. So you have a look at the sections now. So what we could do now is, like, because obviously we've got a bit of a melody, a bit of a riff going on now, what we could do is we could chop it up. We could do like, you could loop that or kind of stretch it out or slow it down, whatever else we need to. Now it's worth having a look at the warp modes whenever you do this, just so you can see what's going on. So I'll show you warp modes because it's super, super important whenever you're warping. So let's say we got this little simple melody, like overly simplified. At the moment, because it's basically warped from 128 BPM to the BPM of the project, which is 120 right now. And because of this warp mode, so if you have a look down here, where it's under warp mode, it's on repitch. It basically means that the pitch is getting changed because we're stretching the sound out in a sense. We're slowing it down by stretching it out. When you stretch it out without applying any algorithms, it slows it down. So if I tell you what it sounds like originally at the right speed, that's the correct notes, whereas when it gets slowed down, it's repitched down. And the problem with that is it basically means that, yes, it may sound like a cool riff kind of pitched down, but it won't necessarily land on any notes in any particular key. And so it might not land on nice notes. It might land in between notes, if that makes sense. So I always recommend give it a go, repitch, because it's always the best quality. But sometimes if you want it to stay the exact same melody in terms of C, D, F, G, whatever else the notes are, change it to something like tones or texture or complex. Best thing to do, just try a few, see what it sounds like. The idea behind tones is if the notes were originally really good notes, tones works the best. If they were kind of polyphonic notes, i.e. like chords or noisy samples or textures, texture works as a really good warp mode. Otherwise, complex kind of tries to guess the right way to do it. But if we try tones, it's having a go, but it's fucking up a bit. It's like getting a bit grainy, so we might want to try, say, texture. A bit grainy still, but it might gives it a bit of edge, a bit of kind of character that we might actually like. Whereas if we try complex, it kind of loses a bit of edge, but it's a lot cleaner. So it's definitely a case of make sure you choose the right warp mode when you warp. It's super important, otherwise it will sound whack. But it can be quite cool to kind of do some weird stuff. For example, I'll give you another example because, yes, this is taking some time, but you know what? It's time well spent because it's time spent with Multiplier. If we drag out this vocal, we'll let it load, and then we'll do warp. Click the first note or the first warp marker, choose segment BPM 128, and then now, because basically our project is at, say, 110 BPM and the original clip was 128 BPM, it's slowing this vocal down. So if we leave the warp mode on repitch, then this vocal will sound all pitched down and all awesome. That's not a vocal at all. That's not a vocal. That's not a vocal!
Falling like dominoes, reaching for stars one by one. Hands illuminate the sky, goes.
So you can see how it kind of, when repitch happens, it kind of changes the pitch as you speed or slow it down. So if you speed it up, it actually sounds quite nice.
Falling like dominoes, reaching for stars one by one.
But you can also pitch it up and pitch it down kind of without having to have a BPM you don't want. So let's say we did actually want it at, say, 128 BPM, which is the original BPM.
Falling like dominoes.
So that's how it actually should sound. Now, let's say we wanted to actually pitch it up or down just for like creative effect. If we change the warp mode to texture or tones, and then we got this transpose knob, so by playing with this, we can pitch it up or down.
Falling like dominoes, reaching for stars.
So you can see how you can get pretty creative, and you can also automate that transpose knob as well, which can lead to some really cool effects. But I'll leave you to figure that out. Cool. So that's the main kind of remix technique in Ableton, kind of using kind of the original stems and kind of warping them. The second technique is to kind of take these warped clips and then kind of chop it up. Now, I'll show you one or two very quick tips for chopping it up. Let's just warp this vocal again. Cool, it's already warped. So you can find when you chop it up, the best way to chop it up nice and quickly is, first of all, make sure it's warped. But after that, just learn your shortcuts. So let's say we wanted to chop it up, say, like, wanted to chop it up in some cool way, so you can kind of just drag out in areas, hit delete. If you want to duplicate sections, drag a section, Command D, so you can be like stuff like that. You can also do reversing, so if you wanted to reverse this bit here, click it, go down to reverse, do a click, give it a few seconds if it's a big sample, a few seconds to load, and now it's reversed. So you can definitely get quite creative with your edits and your chops. So I'd say definitely learn your shortcuts for duplicating, and just get really quick at editing. And the more you practice, the better you'll get at it. And just remember you can reverse as well. That's a nice way to do kind of chops and edits for your remix. Because remember, the idea behind a remix is you take their idea and then kind of take it somewhere new, take it somewhere else, and kind of put your own creative stamp on it. And that's kind of the idea behind it. And there's one final little technique that I'll show you. So let's bring out a new MIDI track. So they're the two main techniques. The other one is called kind of sampling. So we'll bring out a new MIDI track. You'll all have Simpler if you have Ableton. If you have the full version of Ableton, you have Sampler, which is a more advanced sampler, but Simpler is a simple sampler. Get it? Merge. So double click Simpler even, and then it brings out this instrument. So now what we do is we find a stem, so we'll find something we want to sample, like the shout, no idea what it is, but we'll drag out the shout into drop sample here. So now what we need to do is in this big kind of greeny yellow box, you need to drag the start point to the start of where the actual sound is. So we'll drag it over near, we'll click and zoom in, and then we'll drag it to around the start of this sample. And then what you'll find is this Ableton Push is basically just a glorified keyboard. Any note you press on the keyboard will play back this sample at a different speed depending on what note you play. So by default, I think it's C3, middle C will play the sample back at the correct speed. Higher notes will play it back faster, lower notes slower. So.
Now you want all go home or what?
So yeah, it's playing it back at different speeds. So what you can find you can do can be quite nice is just kind of maybe chuck something like a delay on there. So let's check audio effects, ping pong delay. Especially if you like doing some kind of housey sort of remix, it can be quite a nice way to incorporate the existing vocal or an existing kind of, especially an existing vocal. But you've kind of laid out your track, you've got kind of your main section going, and then you want just kind of like a vocal sort of fill, sort of delay layer over the top. Just bring out a sampler, chuck the vocal from the remix part in, and play it back slightly fast with some sort of cool delay. And then that kind of rings through the track. You get the idea, it's cool stuff. But that's another idea. Get creative with your sampling, but that's the basics and that's one of your main techniques. So there's three main techniques to summarize: warping, kind of chopping up and editing and kind of slicing those warped files, and then there's also sampling. They're going to be your three main go-to techniques. Remember, you still need to have your own musical ideas in there. I always recommend putting your own drums in there, for example. And yes, it's a case of taking... You want to make sure people can still recognize the original track. Otherwise, it's not as much a remix as much as just a sampling of the track. But then make sure it sounds like your own thing. You've taken it somewhere else. You haven't just done an edit. Make sense? I've been Multiplier. There's been a lack of Skrillex jokes, but you've learned a lot of important things, so that's all right. I'll work on my Skrillex jokes. I don't even know if Skrillex jokes are funny anymore, but I'll work on it. I'll work on it. I've been Multiplier. This has been How to Remix in Ableton. star wipe, and we're out.